Hello, this video is a technical introduction to the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team's Tasking Manager, an online portal created by the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team, or HOT for short, for contributing collaboratively to OpenStreetMap to aid humanitarian mapping. Tasking Manager was developed by HOT member Pierre Giraud, who has provided the content for this video. It's not a tutorial for how to use Tasking Manager, but is intended rather for developers to give them an understanding of its underlying code and filing structure so they too can contribute to its development and maintenance. Here we have the home page. Let's go through projects. It's the application itself. Tasking Manager is open source and all available on GitHub at this URL. So here we can see all the files that make up the application. Further down is the README file that explains how to install your own instance of the Tasking Manager. This documentation should be up to date and has been used by others to get set up, but if you do encounter any problems or spot an error, please get in touch and we'll try to help. Tasking Manager works on Linux and Mac. Setup on Windows may be possible but hasn't been implemented. Tasking Manager is written in Python and uses Python virtualenv so that all the dependencies run on the application's own environment and not your operating system's main Python environment. The Tasking Manager browser interface is created by the Pyramid framework, which you can see here. This is a bit different from Python's popular Django platform in that it doesn't offer everything built in but needs to be custom designed. The Tasking Manager currently uses PostgreSQL and PostGIS for the backend database, and to manage access to these it uses SQL Alchemy. Okay, so let's have a look at the files. The file setup.py shows the different versions of the dependency packages currently in use. If you need a new package, you can add it here to load it into the Python environment. Another important file is development.ini, which contains the different configuration variables for the application. You shouldn't have to modify this, but you will have to create a new file called local.ini to connect the URL to your database. This process is documented. Delving a little deeper, you'll find a directory called osmtm, which contains the main Python files. The most important file in here is model.py, which describes the database and how it is mapped to the Python objects. For example, there is a class table for user, which is mapped to the users table in the database. The file also describes the relationships between these class elements. For example, if we access the tasks property of a project class, down here, then we'll get a list of all the tasks relating to that project. SQL Alchemy generates all of the table schemas automatically. There's a script in the OSTM scripts folder which initializes the database. When you create your Tasking Manager instance, you'll launch a script that creates this. This is all documented. In order to handle database versioning, Tasking Manager uses a Limbic framework that works on top of SQL Alchemy to help migrating data. An Alembic script was recently used to, for example, add a due date to project table so that if somebody upgrading to a new version of the Tasking Manager, their database would also be updated. The documentation for Alembic processes still under development, but all the standard Alembic conventions have been observed. Now let's take a look at some of the key models. At the core are the classes user, project, and task. Let's go back to user. This, as you've probably guessed, handles the information for OSM accreditation details of the user and other details such as their permissions. Project defines an area to be mapped. This relates to a particular humanitarian situation or an identified area. Then we have tasks, which are the grid cells or polygons of a particular project. A task is the single work cell that a user can select and lock from other users and then specify if it's been done or not. For each task we have entries in another table. Task state, for example, which keeps a complete history of all the changes of state for each cell. For example, when it was designated as ready, done, or validated or removed. We keep a history record for each change of state and for also each change in logs. And we also have a task comment class, which is used for comments either after working on a task or after validation. Linked to project is a table called area. Each project has a specified area, the bounding box, as well as priority areas, the pink areas in the tasking manager. As demonstrated here. Area is separate from the project in order to potentially enable the sharing of areas between projects. If this is implemented, it would be possible, for example, to have a project for buildings in the same area as one for roads. To enable Tasking Manager as a multi-language tool, all descriptions, instructions, and so on should have translations. These are all kept in this class here, which contains a table for different translations. There are also class tables for license, for imagery licenses, and messages for everything that a user sees in their inbox. So as you can see, everything about the database is in this file here, models.py. Permission checks in Tasking Manager are mostly undertaken by the file security.py, which defines what the permissions are and how they're referenced in views, which we'll come to shortly. In Pyramid, these are called access control lists, or ACL. And so, for example, only users with a project edit role, down here, can create a new project. The application's JavaScript is in static JS. And there are several files here for the various pages and some of the page elements. So here, for example, is the code that generates the leaflet maps. And other code specifies which controls to display when you click on a feature, for example, or controls how features are displayed, or how users select tabs and lock tasks, etc. So that explains how the back end of the data and the database works. Now we'll come on to how the back end links up with the interface, and this is done with views and how they link to templates. So views are they provide the structure for the Tasking Manager's browser interface. We can find them located in the osmtm/views folder. And the URL links to the views are in the parent init file, the parent folder init.py file down here. So when a user goes to a particular URL, for example /project/new, they'll be redirected to a particular view, in this case project_new. So for another example, this page that we have open already for a Nepal project, project 1018, takes you to the view for that project using the data for that particular project. Pyramid will then open this in project.py, where further down we should find the information about where the tasking manager will send the user. Pyramid then renders the page using what's known as a Mako template, and these are found in the templates folder. So this will render the project.mako, and here you can see the HTML and the JavaScript that relates to that page. So this stage a check is also made, so if I were to go to project/new, as I mentioned, then I'm going to get a 403 because I don't have the permission to create a new project yet. So let's look at another example here to illustrate how templates handle translation. So let's look at the file user_.mako. Sorry, user_menu.mako. This will control what is shown in the menus in the navigation bar for the user. Up here. Here we have a string, for example, logout. This is translated, and it uses this notation underscore brackets in quotes. This is interpreted as a Mako variable. Tasking Manager then extracts every single string that needs to be translated, such as this. It generates getText, which is a PO file, and this is then sent to Transifex for translation. So if you're going to build a new feature which introduces new strings, please provide a default English translation directly into the code in this way. Strings will then be sent to Transifex manually by the admin. Also at this point, a package called bleach is used, which cleans the HTML in the user input. Moving now to the styling, CSS code. Now to touch briefly on styling. So for the tasking manager, the CSS code is compiled. CSS receives less CSS files from Bootstrap and elsewhere, and these are then compiled into main.css, which is loaded into the browser. Let's move on now to testing. So when anyone contributes to the tasking manager, they're encouraged to create unit tests to show that the code is doing the right job and it's not breaking the application. The tests are located in osm/tm/tests, and these are intended to be as comprehensive as possible. For example, when a user creates a new project, there are tests to check that they have the right permissions, that the form is correctly filled, etc. So down here you can see some of the tests that are undertaken. Tests are also written to demonstrate when bugs have been fixed. At the moment, test coverage in Tasking Manager is performed by a package called coverage, and at the moment about 95% of the application is covered. The documentation describes how to create the database for tests, which require a testing environment. This requires a specific local.test.ini file, similar to local.ini, which I mentioned earlier, to be created. This is documented as usual. To run tests, execute command, and I'll put it in the screen at this point, ./m/bin/nose-tests in your console. And if the new code is okay, then nothing should fail. All developer contributions to Tasking Manager are managed, of course, via GitHub. If you have a contribution, please send it through as a pull request. So please ensure requested commits do not break the existing unit tests that I've just described, and preferably commits that feature their own new unit tests. Whenever someone creates a pull request, GitHub runs the existing tests in Travis CI, and if they fail, the pull request can't be merged. Python code is also validity checked. As per GitHub convention, if the pull request is for a new feature, please create a new branch for it first. Up here. New versions of Tasking Manager are released as often as possible, depending on the quantity of new code, but in general this is every 2 months or so. So for any further questions, please contact the HotOSM IRC channel, which you can find on the hot mailing list, or alternatively ping Pierre Giraud on GitHub. This is his page. Or if appropriate, create a new issue in the Tasking Manager's page here. You can see the previous issues. So that concludes the introduction. Thank you for listening, and for easy reference we'll shortly post a link to a briefing document based on this video in the description below this. So thank you for your interest and for supporting Tasking Manager. Goodbye.